CEOs Speak is an exclusive BitBeam podcast series featuring interviews of hundreds of skilled and talented CEOs who share their strategies for leading some of the country's most successful companies. Join Charlie Katz, our executive extraordinaire, as he uncovers the heart and soul of today's business leaders.
Today, I'm very excited to have with us Dr. Bart Barthelemy, whose credentials would take me about an hour to list. So I'll just try and touch on some key points. He's a founder and director of the Wright Brothers Institute. And he's also the president of the Collaborative Innovation Institute. He headed the Air Force's largest aerospace research. He was in charge of the National Aerospace Plane Program. And the list goes on, but I think people get the idea that you're involved with very high technology, very advanced technology, probably quite a bit of security clearance involved, which means that I'm sure that the Russians and the Chinese are listening into this podcast to see what I could get you to divulge.
Yeah.
Let me take a step back, and I say step back, way back, because I'm always curious about the person more than I am about the company, because the person creates a company. You took a certain course in life, but let's go back to your early years. Let's go back literally to your grade school years. Was there something that inspired you to go in this direction? Did it come from your parents, a mentor? And I'm talking about elementary school, grade school. Was it just your own nature? If you look back now and see where you are today, could you see a connection and say, yeah, I could see then where I was going to end up today?
Sure. Well, I don't think there was any particular person, but I did go to a Catholic grade school, and so there were a lot of nuns. Okay, I think there's the folklore about nuns are mostly true. They're tough cookies. Okay, and they don't let you get away with almost anything. So the two things that I think they embedded in my mind was sort of service. You know, you have to do service in your life. You have to give as well as get. And I think they pounded that into my head. And that's why all my life, 60 years of work with the Air Force and the Wright Brothers Institute, in a way, has been servicing, the country or the Defense Department or the Air Force. The second thing, though, I believe is that very quickly I found it easy to study math and science. Way back I'm 80 years old, so we're talking like in the 50s here. So these math and sciences of today almost astound me, but in those days I was good at it, and they kept saying, "Well, you're going to be a scientist. You're going to be a scientist." And I think it makes a huge difference if in the first 10, 12 years of your life, people sort of give you a couple of goals or a couple of missions that they believe honestly. And I think they were doing it for my own good as well as maybe other reasons. But this is where you can make your contribution. And then after that, it was one step at the time. In high school, I pretty much did well in science and engineering. My big break, honest to God, was getting a scholarship to MIT. And even in those days, it was tough to get into MIT. And I was prepared not to go there. But when I got there, I thought, oh my gosh, everybody in this place is smarter than me. And so that's kind of humbling. But you learn from smarter people. As a matter of fact, I always believe that if you throw yourself in with smart people, you're going to feel a little silly for a while, but you're going to learn a lot, and you don't talk as much, you listen. So I think that those were, sort of to get to your point, Charlie, why I headed in that direction. And then after that, it was Air Force and technology and, sort of patriotism and things like that. So, but you're right. The early start sometimes is key.
My background parallels yours, and I'm a writer, creative. My career has been advertising, creative department, writing commercials and so on. I also took playwriting to give creative writing courses. But when I was in grade school, I was already sending off stories. I was writing them and sending them off to editors of magazines. Now, I didn't realize I was punishing them because I was sending it off handwritten. And let me explain to you my handwriting.
Yeah.
My mother couldn't read my handwriting. If I went into a meeting, I took notes, I couldn't read it either. And these guys are getting on the desk envelopes, handwritten. Of course, they never bothered. They went straight into the trash can. But the point is, as you said, you start early, and that just shows who you are, and it defines you.
Yes.
It's funny to be able to actually talk to a rocket scientist. That cliche, well, it's not rocket science.
Right.
To you.
My wife has a T-shirt on it that says, "I'm married to a rocket scientist, but don't ask him how to fix my TV."
There was a wonderful in the Comparative Academy Award advertising. It's called the Clio. So the Clio magazine, they had a brilliant cartoon, and it showed two brain surgeons in the middle of an operation, and from the expression on the face of one of them was clearly that he muffed it. And the other one says, "Take it easy. It's not advertising."
Right.
And don't fret over it, But
Right.
I would say that the first thing that strikes me is that the excitement you must have and the thrill of discovery and doing marvelous things. I mean, I could just imagine in my mind, the technology, and of course it's working with numbers and all the rules of what area of technology you're involved with. But you're always at the cusp of the boundary, and you're always pushing the boundary. And that must be just a fascinating thrill to live a life that way.
Yeah. Well, that's why I actually stayed in the Air Force for 35 years, because I think everybody probably would appreciate, they're on the cusp of new technology. They have to be. We have to be better than any potential enemy. And then after I retired from the Air Force, I formed the Wright Brothers Institute, which was really to continue that and go further, innovation and all that. So, I was having a conversation the other day that at my age, I've lived through two huge transitions. One is from paper and pencil to computers. Honest to goodness, that happened. And a lot of people that are young thought, I had no idea.
Right.
And the second one, I think, and I'm going to call it the digital transformation, and that is, the internet and how, we can now create things that are avatars and stuff like that. And that's going to be the future. I really do believe that the future will be kind of models that are additive to our human capabilities, like not just robots, but, thinking models that would help us and actually push us even beyond. So, for example, I built a rocket with one of my cohorts that we thought could go to Mars, but we always thought, oh my gosh, it's going to take 2 years to get a human being to Mars with this rocket. Well, instead of sending a human being, maybe we send these days a computer, which is awfully like a human being, and sort of explore that way. It doesn't matter how long it takes to get a computer to Mars, because that's okay. So new technology, I think you're right. New breakgrounds.
Right. You probably have very high security clearance. Obviously, I mean, you're really at the edge of it all. Do you still have that today? Are you required to have that today? And because you once worked in it, how does that work?
No, as a matter of fact, the whole idea of security clearances is really a need to know, a need to know. So when you do have a need to know, and that's determined by somebody, the president or something like that, then you get those clearances. But when you don't need to know, you don't need to keep those clearances. And that's a much better way of doing it, because, it's like any gossip, right? If you tell a whole bunch of people, the secret's going to get out. And so that whole approach to security is more, not so much around the person, but around, does this guy really need to be involved in it? So I'm not involved right now in any top secret programs, and so I don't need to have that clearance.
Do you miss that excitement of being right at the edge?
I still think I am. With the Wright Brothers Institute, we are embedded in the Air Force's research and development program. Now, we don't do the research. I mean, they do the research. They have billions of dollars to do the research. But what we do is help them do it smartly or innovatively or collaboratively. So I'm still there, and I love it. I wake up every morning. I just turned 80. I wake up every morning thinking, wow, I'm going to learn something new. I'm going to talk to some cool people. Most of the people I talk to now much younger than me, but that's okay. I mean, they know all kinds of cool things. So it is exciting. You're absolutely right, Charlie, that probably, I don't know if it kept me young, but it kept me going anyways. And I love it.
It sounds like you could keep going for another 80 years without a problem.
I would love it. My body may give way. Unfortunately.
A quick anecdote. When I was a young boy, also in grade school, so we flew out. I had an uncle who was an engineer working for Hughes. And so I flew out there, and he's got the FBI clearance. I remember the badge hanging down.
The badge, yeah.
And I guess he looked at it, and he told me he's working on the first air-to-air heat-seeking missile, which sounds very impressive. I have no idea what that is, but the most important thing that stays in my mind is he looked at his nephew and said, "Nah, he's not a Russian spy. I could tell him."
Yeah.
It wasn't one of those cases where if I tell you I have to shoot you.
Yeah, right. I always use that. It's a good thing to have in the background.
Yeah. Exactly. So I want to touch on something when you said about robots. I give courses on creativity. Creative thinking is the process of how the mind works. And some people, it comes to them naturally. I just wrote an article that it's possible to train yourself to think creatively, but it's a discipline that you've got to be prepared to change. The educational system is very linear and very, what do you call it? 1 + 1 = 2, and that's it. There's no option. It's totally diametrically opposed to creative thinking.
Yep.
I'm curious. Do you think that robots will have that facility to creatively think, to go off in a tangent and explore? And let me take it a step further. When I talk about creativity and I try and explain it to people, so number one, I lay out the premise that creativity and curiosity are synonyms. They're one and the same. You need that curiosity to feed the brain. Without that, you have nothing to work with. The next thing I do is I show them a picture of a pinball machine and say that's the way the brain works in the creative process. It's bouncing off, picking out ideas, trying to look for associations and connections and so on. Is that possible? Do you think that a robot or a computer would be able to think in that fashion?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, they already do. You might be scared by this answer, but they already do. But I want to just say something because you said something that I believe totally. Creativity and curiosity are very much the same thing. If you don't have curiosity, you're not going to be very creative because all you know is what you know. Curiosity gets you what you don't know, or even what you don't know you don't know, And the pinball machine, I think, is a wonderful analogy because the more you bounce off somebody else with a different idea and the more you ask questions. I think, if you talk, you're only hearing what you know. If you ask questions and you let somebody talk, you will hear new things, and that'll bounce some neuron off your brain and do it. But let me get back to the robot question. Yeah, through artificial intelligence, and you've heard that term, the robots are now able to project with learning themselves. They call it machine learning. You'll hear that term more and more. So the machine is actually learning. And you don't know it's learning. It will, for example, if it's looking at something and it looks at it and kind of thinks it knows, let's say a drone is looking at something, but then it sees something new coming from the left, it will learn that it ought to look to the left because that's where the action is coming. And the machine that returns back to the base is smarter than the drone that you sent out. Now that causes a problem because sometimes, and I'm not meaning here to scare anybody, but the machine will be smarter than what you think it is. So supposing it's armed, the drone, let's say the airplane is armed with a missile, and it's beginning to learn that everything comes from the left, and we tell it through computers, hey, that's bad. Things coming from the left are bad. It may actually activate the missile. You got to make sure that it can't do that because all of a sudden it's doing something bad. But yeah, machine learning, which is a subset of artificial intelligence, is now on our drones. It really is.
So you're saying that we've caught up to 2001, the famous HAL computer.
HAL,
and it's right here at our doorstep, and he's knocking on your door.
Oh, it is. It is. Now, it's not sophisticated, okay? It's not, I mean, the human brain is extremely sophisticated and you do so many things, but in certain areas, you can get it to learn. It's called machine learning, and it will change its baseline, its operating system. There are operating systems on all of these things like phones and stuff. It'll change its operating system because it's learning new things, just like a child, okay? So you have to make sure that there are limits on what that machine can do. If it's a drone with a missile, you got to make sure that it doesn't fire at random, okay? On the other hand, here's the positive part. It may go and find out things that the human is incapable of kind of extrapolating to. It may be able to, it's so boring sometimes to look at something over and over again for hours and days. The machine doesn't care. It doesn't care if it's bored. It's going to be there. And so it may learn things that you and I would find too boring and, give up really early on the process. So there's a lot of great work going on. It's advanced. It really is. And I really predict by the year 2030, which is only 9 years away, that we will have machines that are learning and helping us do all kinds of things. Maybe not in the house, but in critical situations like businesses and even in transportation, communication, and defense as well.
Let me throw this at you, talking again about the drones and the missile. Do you think the computer could get to the stage where it makes tactical decisions? And let me explain what I mean. You're an officer, you've got the map in front of you, you're given the assignment, you go out onto the field, and the commanding officer is not there, he's relying on you to make a judgment as you progress. And you're filtering in your mind everything you know about how the enemy is going to act, and so on. And you come to a decision at that point of how to proceed. You think that the computer, forgetting about that because you programmed it to look left, but it has the ability to think tactically and take in all the considerations and lead to an action on its own that is strategic.
Yeah, exactly. As a matter of fact, that's a nice way to put it. You want to make sure that the strategic part is left to human beings, okay, left to that pilot that's on the ground or the commander. But the tactical decisions, which are immense, very hard, very difficult, they're happening all the time, you do want to turn over to the computer because it's too hard for humans to do that. But you want to do that in a way that the computer knows that there are boundaries, okay? There are strategic boundaries that you don't want that computer and the drone to go beyond. So, for example, let's say it's a geographical area. You want it to make decisions within that geographical area, but if it returns to base, you don't want it to make the same decisions, So, yeah, I think that's the way it's going to go. It's going that way right now. In certain test cases, we're doing exactly what you said.
The social implications and economic implications, which is discussed on nothing of anything new, but as you describe it, is really awesome because what it essentially says is that, yes, that machines will replace human workers. And beyond that, that those who are educated and have the opportunity to work with the machines and therefore move along the economy in that direction are going to be just very separated from those who lack that type of an education and that ability. The gap will be humongous, and the social ramifications over time, it's almost you can't foresee it. It'll go back to the Russian Revolution, where you had the royalty or whatever, and the class gap was so humongous, and those not part of that very limited select world suffered tremendously, and they revolted. And I think to a certain degree we see that even today with obviously the Trump population and so on. And
Yep.
so it's sort of like just under the surface, and I'm certainly not a prophet, can't foresee where it'll go, but I think it's something that we have to be cognizant of the ramifications beyond the technology.
Oh, yeah.
When you mentioned the aerospace plane program, should I read in that our rockets that what do you call it, the Challenger? Are you
Yep.
referring to creating the Challenger and those that go to space and interplanetary type of travel and things like that?
Yep.
To what degree did EMC squared make this all possible? An understanding that he had that opened the eyes to a different understanding of physics and everything. Is that somehow in some fashion a route for where we are today, or is it a totally different area?
No, I think Einstein was a gift to humanity. He was a genius. He was able to get us to that E equals MC square. Maybe other people might have got us there eventually, but he got us there. I think that equation is the most important equation in all of the universe. I really do, because it explains the Big Bang. It explains why we have planets and why we have energy, and energy gets converted to mass, and mass is matter, and vice versa. I think it also explains where the future might be, because there's so much energy in mass, in matter, and we're not tapping into it. And I think we have to. We're burning stuff. We're burning oil. So I think the future is going to be nuclear, or, things of that nature, nuclear fusion, because otherwise, the planet will probably get destroyed before we can get to that. So we're all working hard. I'm a nuclear physicist as well, and I really truly believe that fusion energy, which we don't have yet, which is based on E equals MC squared, is the solution for the planet. We're working on it, but it's a toughie, but we'll get there. And I really think that rockets really is an attempt to, kind of cover our bets, because in a way, if we can go to another planet, then we can stress our own Earth a little bit less, or we can put people that do things that are stressful on other planets like the moon or in satellites. So I think it all goes together, and I really do believe that's a key. We're not using it yet. Everybody knows it, but we're trying, and that will really determine the future. If we can get to fusion energy, which doesn't destroy the planet, doesn't hurt the planet, and have unlimited amounts of energy, then there can be rockets. That'll be fine, but it'll also help our planet much more.
You worked with a German rocket scientist who I assume worked on the V1 and the V2. I want to assume that.
Yeah, he did. He did. He was our enemy during the early part of World War. He was a nice man, but he worked for, the German command.
Right.
And he did work on the V1. He was the inventor of the jet engine. He really truly invented the jet engine. And the jet engine is really just an idea of taking air, and spinning it fast and compressing it, and then, kind of combusting it. And that's why jets work. That's why jet engines work. He invented that. And I had the wonderful opportunity to be his, protege for about 3 years when he was in the United States Air Force, because after the war, all of these great scientists in Germany either went one of two ways. They went to Russia, and they weren't used very well, or they came to the United States. The ones that came to the United States had a great life, and Hans von Ohlheim was one of them, and he ended up in Dayton, Ohio, because of the Wright brothers, and I ended up in Dayton, Ohio when I was 20 years old as a second lieutenant in the United States Air Force, and so I had this great man as my manager, my boss. And we would sit there and we'd talk about nuclear physics and rocket propulsion, and sometimes draw diagrams. And he was a big advocate of fusion and nuclear rockets, and how to do these things. And of course, eventually he passed on, and I tried to carry out his legacy.
I'm just curious, as a side question, his coming from a different country, with the culture. Was there a cultural gap in talking to him and seeing some of the perspective? You saw it from a very Germanic perspective. You're an American. Did you ever find that, I don't mean harshly, but a friction of perspectives?
Yeah, actually, really I did, and I in my book that, he was very much authoritative oriented. And oftentimes we'd have these conversations and, I was in this little group with him who had a colonel, a U.S. Air Force colonel, as the head. And every once in a while Hans would say, but we must ask the commander. We must ask the commander if it's okay to do this. And I would say, why don't we just do it? And then we can tell the commander what we did. But, it came from living in the Nazi regime of the 30s and the 40s. And, it was like, the Fuhrer, we must ask the Fuhrer, if we can do this. Now, that didn't get in the way of a great relationship, but I always kind of chuckle that he still had that mentality, that kind of cultural, bias, and I would, let's do it.
Yeah. That's sort of having in my mind. So let me ask you, he invented the jet engine. Where were we at that time? And I'm going to be specific what I mean to say. We had brains. We had very smart people. I don't know if we had undertaken yet to discover it, but was it simply that they were there first, or was there a certain knowledge that the Germans had based on maybe their own research that led them to make the breakthrough and so on? Or we simply could have done it, but we were not focused on it?
No, I don't think we could have. We would have eventually, no question about it. But the real scary part of this is that if the Germans, and this was one of the faults of Hitler, if the Germans had taken advantage of Hans von Ohain's jet engine, they would have been able to do much more. Yeah, sure. But they ignored it. Well, Hitler ignored it too. Now,
he had the ME, I think 325, the jet, but when they were doing it, he wanted to be a bomber rather than a fighter.
Yeah.
And that set him back about a year and a half. At the end, when they did bring it, it was devastating, but it had two weaknesses. It was towards the end of the war, so it was too late. And it could only go a certain distance because of the fuel and how to, land and refuel. That hampered it. But had they started in it immediately when they first set off as a fighter, we would have been in a lot of trouble because we couldn't catch up to it and so on.
Now the Brits were doing. Yeah, I was going to say the Brits were doing some great work too, and there's also, a debate as to whether or not they invented the jet engine, because there was some really great work going on in Great Britain at the time during the war. So it doesn't matter who actually invented it. Hans von Ohain is really the German inventor. But the United States never took advantage of either the Brit work either. So the good news is the war ended, for all kinds of other reasons. But had the war been extended, we would have lost many more people. I think we would have still won. I don't think it would have.
Yeah. We would have lost our bombing capabilities would have been devastated.
Yeah.
What if I could ask you, within bounds that you're allowed to, what did you yourself? He invented the engine. What did you invent?
I tried to invent an engine that would take us to space, and an engine like in an airplane. When you fly in an airplane, you look out at those big old things that are hanging on the wing, and they're turbine engines. That's what Hans von Ohain invented. If you want to go to space and you're in your little airplane and you're sitting quietly having a cocktail before you take off, what you need hanging on the wing is what they call a scramjet or a ramjet. And what it does is it takes you well beyond the Mach 1. It takes you to speeds of 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 miles an hour. And the only plane that's ever been built, and I was fortunate to fly in it, is the Blackbird, and it has a ramjet engine. And I won't go into the details, but it gets you to Mach 3. But to get to space, you at least, using air, have to get to Mach 5 or 6, and that requires a scramjet. Now, after that, you still need rockets and stuff like that. But what we were trying to build, and this was President Reagan's idea, was let's make an airplane that goes to space, not a rocket ship, an airplane where you can land at a runway and, put people inside or whatever, cargo, excuse me, and then take it to space. That's what I was trying to invent.
Was that his idea out of the blue, or it was based on people coming to him and saying it was somewhat feasible, or he just woke up one morning and said, let's create an airplane that goes to space?
Yeah, I'll tell you, it wasn't feasible. I tell you, like creativity, and I'm sure you teach this in your class, that chances are, no matter what idea you have, the rest of the world will think you're crazy. Okay, and big idea like let's build an airplane that'll go to space. They go, you are crazy, And so all along, now the good news is President Reagan really wanted. He wanted it for, against the Soviets, but he also thought it would be a great idea to connect the world quicker. Because, you could go to Japan in a half an hour or something like that.
Right.
So,
isn't the Challenger essentially that plane? No, isn't that, or is it a different concept?
Well, the Challenger goes up, and the things fall off, and they fall in the ocean, and find faster. And then
so
when they come,
he literally meant an airplane.
Yeah,
it stays whole, it goes up, stays whole, and lands.
Yeah, exactly. We were going to make airports in about 10 places in the world where you could land and then get other people on board. And remember, it went around the world in 1 hour, and so it could be used as simply commercial transportation. But the real idea was to get to space. And by the way, when you go up in a shuttle, the cost of a pound getting up there or a human body getting up there is 100 times more than it would be with an airplane. So there was definitely an economic aspect of this too.
You just said something really interesting. You were on a Blackbird. You were on the U-2.
Well, it's a Blackbird, so the SR-71. It's probably the one that you're used to seeing, long, black with two engines on the side.
Right.
Yeah, I flew.
What was it like? What's that experience like?
It wasn't wild and crazy. I've flown in fighter jets, and that if you go fast enough in a fighter jet, you pass out. So that's a whole different experience. With a Blackbird, you go fast, but you don't feel that the G forces that you do. Right. You get that very high. We got up to about 90,000 feet, and you begin to see the curvature of the Earth. You're going really fast, but of course, it's all relative. You don't feel like you're going because you see. But you were trained to be a pilot, even though you were more in the scientific area. Is that how it worked? They wanted you to fly. Right. That wasn't really a pilot's job. I was playing with the engines. I was an engineer up there. No, there was a pilot in front of me who was flying the airplane, essentially.
Okay. Answer this question to me. The planes today at max speed basically go, I forget how many miles per second. How do they see anything? I mean, it's so fast. Is it all instrument? They can't look at the ground. The ground is almost not relevant to them. They're beyond anything every time they look. So is it everything purely the instruments guiding them and then the decisions are instrument based? Right.
Yeah. Well, they're more just like any kind of space travel. They're more, they're beyond using the ground as a reference point. They're more around looking at the sky and looking at different elements and seeing where you are, because you're way up there. 90,000 feet is 3 times higher than most people have ever flown. And when you're in an airplane, you look down, it's about 35,000 feet. So you are way up there. And if you're going fast, you got to make decisions quicker too. Now, we never end up we didn't build a plane. I want to make sure
I understand. But a fighter plane, he makes decisions not by sight, probably by, first of all, today, you don't necessarily see the enemy. Your computer registers them, and you lock in and you press the button, right? I mean, it's not So let me ask you this question: How would it work to the airports? In my CEO podcast, I had 2 people who worked for intelligence. One worked with the naval intelligence, and the other one more with CI. And then as far as the naval intelligence, they said, well, it's no longer two battleships logging shells at each other, over 20 miles. He says, correct. Today, the warfare is about intelligence. Being ahead, it's understanding what's happening and staying ahead of the curve, so to speak. I would assume it's very similar in the Air Force. It's really trying to think where they're at and how do we stay 2 years ahead of them.
Absolutely. It is intelligence, and even if you're in the airplane, you're not looking. I mean, you do certainly have the ability to look outside the cockpit, and we have helmet-mounted displays and stuff like that on our pilots. But the future, I think, may not be people in airplanes. It may be people on the ground using intelligence to move the airplane in the air and do whatever is needed. So we call those ISR operators. The first I is intelligence surveillance, reconnaissance operators. They're on the ground and they're flying the airplanes. A lot of the future, I think, will be unmanned airplanes. We call them drones. You've heard of that.
Right.
And, it makes a lot of sense that if you don't have to put the person in there, it makes the airplane much easier to build. And secondly, they aren't going to get hurt. The guys on the ground 1,000 away. I think that's the future. Now, it may even be the future for commercial travel. That might be a little scary when you go into the airplane and you find out there's no platform. But on the other hand, it may actually be a safer airplane that if there's two guys up there that are, look good with their nice hats and all that, but really they're not even doing anything. They're just there for show. They're looking at the instruments. That's not the case, obviously, but people feel comfortable. That I've heard, I don't know if this is true or not, that the reason for the second pilot is really to make people comfortable. There's really no great need for a second pilot. That costs a little bit of money, but people feel like, oh, well, if the first guy has a heart attack, the other guy will take over. Well, that never happens, actually, very, very rarely. But
I will tell you an amusing story. I was in South Africa, so my friend had a friend who worked with him. He was a pilot in South African Airlines, and he had a sense of humor. At one time, he comes out of the cabin with a long roll of yarn, and he's unwinding it as he walks back, and he finally comes to the seat with this old lady. He says, excuse me, but I have to go to the gentleman's room, and could you hold on to this and you'll be controlling the plane till I come back? The look on her face was, and the great story is when he was retiring, it was his last flight, he was going to fly, he gets on a plane dressed like an ordinary passenger and he takes his seat. And, the South Africans are dramatic, and they keep saying, where's that pilot? How come we're not taking off? How come? Well, if the pilot doesn't show up, I'm flying the plane. And he's going on like this for about 10 minutes, and he's saying, well, that's it. I'm flying the plane now. I'm not waiting for the pilot. He gets up. The guy in front of him, literally, gives him a shot in the jaw and says, you're not flying the plane. He thought he was a wacko. And the guy ended up with a hurt jaw, and he never ended up flying his last flight. So I guess, it was a cute story.
That's I want to use another story you could tell other people. So actually through the Blackbird, the tradition is that as you get off the Blackbird, they dump a big barrel of water on you, because you've been in space, kind of like, football coach.
Right.
So I changed quickly and got in my automobile and down to Los Angeles Airport, got on an airplane, but I had forgotten that my briefs were still wet. So I went on the plane. The stewardess looks at me and she says, sir, have you been drinking? And there's something wrong with you. I said, no, look, I've been doing today. I've been up in space and, my fucking shut up. Don't give this guy any more drinks.
Very cute. One question that is it really possible for any country to be far ahead? Aren't we always playing catch up, or everyone's playing catch up? Is it really feasible? In other words, the Chinese are intelligent, they have technology, we're intelligent, we have technology. Is it more in reality that it's a neck to neck race, give or take? Rather than somebody being so far ahead, let's say with the atom bomb, at that time we were a couple of years ahead. But today, is it possible to have any distance over the enemy?
Well, think of the past. Everybody knew what each other was doing. They were at least intelligent, getting at. I think the real difference is, can you act on that intelligence? So, for example, I mean, there were a lot of countries that knew how to build a nuclear weapon, but we were able to build a nuclear weapon. And, so then the Soviets, it's going to be the same thing in the future. The thing that worries me more about that, even if there's just a small difference in their capability versus ours, it depends what that difference is in. Like, for example, if they wanted to use biological warfare against the United States, you would see things like we saw in the last year. You would see terrible effects on the economy, on our way of living. Well, that didn't take a lot of technology to do something like that. There are people who say, well, was this really a release or something, a mistake? So I worry about little differences. You're right. There's not going to be big differences. We all kind of know what we know. But little differences, if they're acted upon and they surprise us or we're ready for them, it would hurt the United States. Same thing with any country. I mean, everybody has to worry about it. It is amazing, and I am always amazed because I grew up. I was born before World War II, and I've grown up in the Cold War and all these other wars. And we knew about nuclear weapons in 1945. We dropped 2 of them to end the war. And here's the marvelous thing: there's not been a nuclear attack or war ever since then. So somehow countries are behaving themselves, recognizing if they really pull all out with nuclear or biological for that matter, it'd be the end of the world. And so I think there's some restraint, by all countries, and thank God, because we don't want a nuclear war.
Where does Israel fit into this Air Force technology? Obviously, to them, it's a game of survival, so it's real time. It's not, thinking ahead. Are they as good as people seem to think they are?
I'm sorry, what's your first question?
No, is Israel as good as people think they are in the technology?
Yeah, they are. They put a lot of effort on military capability. I mean, you can't even see it sometimes. And they have a system. We don't like it, the communist system, but they have a system where you can insist that people work on this, demand it. They demand that your companies work for the government, demand that, all the talented people do military work. We don't have that. We let a young graduate from any school, let's say MIT, they want to go and work for Amazon or Microsoft, that's fine. We don't force them to come to the Air Force. So the danger is that kind of a system does build military capabilities that are extreme. Now, we all are hoping that our capability scares them enough that they don't act on it, or they recognize that if they act on it, the consequences for them are just as bad. It's a silly thing to do. So that's what we're hoping. Who knows?
Let's explore innovation, which is, and I would say, your heart and soul. And the company Vitbean, which puts on the CEO Speaks, we're entrepreneurial, and we work with entrepreneurial. And a good part of my career in advertising, I worked with the big corporations developing campaigns for Colgate, Home Depot, but I've also worked entrepreneurial, and I'm fascinated by. I want to ask you, and I'm trying to see if I could say this question intelligently. Could you synthesize the innovative mentality, the process that the mind goes through in working on a project to innovate it? Is it searching? Is it starting with a problem? What would you say are the steps? And when you wrap around and you're in an innovative mood, you say, here's a problem, and nobody's ever figured it out. How does it work?
Well, my book that I just wrote, Collaborative Innovation, kind of does that. And here's the 3 steps that I think are crucial. First of all, whatever the problem is, and I'm going to use Einstein here, whatever the problem is, stay in the problem space as long as you can, because it's really easy to see a problem, think that's the real problem, and you solve the wrong problem in the end. You don't solve the critical problem. The second thing is just
what. I want to write this down.
Stay in the space.
Right. Okay.
I think the second thing is something you said, and I believe in totally: be curious. And by that I mean, ask questions, bring in other people, try to figure out if somebody else is working on this problem. Use the internet. Yeah, I'm always a big fan of call in a bunch of people, even people that you don't think might have an interest in it. That's being curious. That's saying, hey,
Right.
what you guys know that I don't know? And I think the last step is that you worked on the solution and what I'll call stakeholders. You try to bring the people that you're going to have to sell it to or that, you need to implement it in the process. That's collaboration. You want to do it. So I say start with collaboration. That is, explore the problem with people who understand the problem. Be curious, have a whole bunch of people that you can ask questions about or use the internet or use all of that. And then when you come to solutions, throw it on that crowd, that gang that you just, assimilated and see if it makes sense. Because if it only makes sense to you, it's not going to go anywhere. It's just going to die of its own weight. So I believe in collaboration throughout the process. And innovation will come out of that collaboration because what you've done is you multiply your brain by the number of people that you get involved in it, and sometimes it's worth doing.
I write marketing columns, and one of them is exactly what you said. That I was writing with the people who discovered the DNA. And they said there were better people working on that, smarter people than we were. But we went outside our field. We spoke to people in other fields and we're looking for different ways of approaching issues and then filtering it back to our search. And they were able to connect in that fashion. So, that collaboration, of course, is a teamwork process. What's his name? I wrote a series of ads about that. And one of the headlines was that, what's his name? Edison had a team he called Muckers. Now, I'm not sure he took away one letter and replaced it with another one, but basically all of his patents came through a teamwork. He had the idea and he put his team to work on it, which means you have to be very skilled at choosing the team and who you're working with and find that complementary relationship. Interesting, I think you'll appreciate this, but one of the ads that I wrote on this subject was about the search for the South Pole between the British and the Norwegians. And Scott, the British, had 100 men on his team, and the Norwegian had only 17 or 19. And he got there 2 weeks ahead, and most of Scott's people did not survive. And the reason why is interesting is because Scott has put together 100 people, irrespective of their experience, their knowledge, and how they work together. Those 19 people were all hand-chosen exactly for what the capabilities are and how they work together. So collaboration and teamwork really is a synergy of being very selective and understanding what the team, how it works, how the organism of a teamwork is. There's so much to talk about, but and I'm very appreciative of your time. A quick question. I'm just curious. Is it really possible in today's world to have cybersecurity? Can we protect our secrets? We see that, my God, they got into NASA. They get all over the place. Is it possible really to have cybersecurity?
Well, I think, I mentioned earlier the need to know, that
right.
you only bring people in. I think that's the key to it all. You don't want a whole bunch of people to know all your secrets. You want only a few, and only when they need it, and then after that, you don't tell them anymore. I really think tighter security is really keeping the story, keeping the invention, keeping whatever, very much to a small group of people. Because the more you get it out, I mean, there may be good people, I'm not saying that they'll leak it out, but loose tongues and all that. So, yeah, now that is the real problem because clearly if you put anything on any of the internet systems, the world knows, even though when you're leaving your house to go on a vacation and says, that's security right there. So, I don't believe in putting anything serious on, the internet. Keep that close hold.
So let me thank you for your time and, I'll ask you one more question. What gives you sleepless nights?
What gives me, my sleepless nights are, I have so many interesting things to work on. I can't stop my thinking about them. I'm working do. So I'm too. I activate my mind too much in the day. It takes me about an hour to calm down there and get.
Okay. Thank you. Today we were fortunate and very exciting, stimulating, insightful discussion with Dr. Bart Barthelemy, who's the founder director of the Wright Brothers Institute, a whole slew of titles throughout his career at the highest level of Air Force research, responsible to the White House. Tremendous accomplishments and achievements, some of which he's allowed to share, some which he won't, unless he has to shoot us, which he doesn't want to do. He's too kind of a gentleman to do that. What I will say in ending this conversation is that we are listening to an 80-year-old gentleman who is fresh and enthusiastic as the day that he just stepped out of college and started. And it is very inspiring. And I hope I could achieve that when I reach your age and have that same excitement and go to work every day and looking forward. And then I'll just end by wishing you another 80 years.
Thank you for joining Charlie Katz, our executive extraordinaire, in yet another insightful interview. Be sure to check out more stories from CEOs across the country at bitbean.com/CEOs Speak to learn more about what it takes to get to the top and stay there.